Well, hello again. I am Dr. Anthony Edwards, and I am the instructor who is teaching higher education leadership. And today we're going to be going over strategic planning, translating aspirations into realities. And strategic planning is a huge part of higher education leadership, so I'm excited to talk about it. I've written about it, and look forward to going over this with you. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, again, I'm glad you asked. We're going to talk about the definitions of strategic planning. We're going to talk about why you should engage in strategic planning. We're going to talk about the different components of a strategic plan. And we're going to talk about the strategic planning process considerations. So, things you should consider when you are in the strategic planning process. All right, so let's start with some definitions of strategic planning. Well, Allison and Kay define strategic planning as a systematic process through which an organization will agree on and build commitment among their key stakeholders to priorities that are going to be essential for achieving the mission. Now, Riley and Sherman define strategic planning as a formal process that's designed to help that organization identify and maintain the optimal alignment with the most important elements or parts of the environmental set, or what's going on in that institution. So identifying and aligning with what's most important. And Bryson in 2011 defined strategic planning as a deliberate, disciplined effort to produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what the organization is, what it does, why it does it. Okay, so it's deliberate, it's disciplined. Okay, it's not just we'll do hopefully whatever we do is working. It's very deliberate and disciplined, and you're really using your decisions and your actions to shape the future of the organization, define the culture, define strategies, what actions you take as an institution, and gives you purpose for why you're doing some actions and abandoning other actions. So I know in our strategic planning process in the past at Charleston State University, we talked a lot about strategic abandonment. So, figuring out what you're going to do differently, what you're going to keep doing, and then also identify what you're going to stop doing in order to achieve your goals. All right, so why engage in strategic planning? So here, strategic planning helps you figure out where you can reduce your resources. So unfortunately, most institutions of higher education don't have an unlimited source of funds. They don't have an unlimited endowment that they can always just tap into, and they can just spend money on however they want to. There are usually going to be some hard decisions where they have to figure out where they're going to cut in order to spend more toward other priorities. You probably also want to engage in strategic planning if you've got key stakeholders who don't share certain goals and priorities. If everybody's operating for themselves and based on what's good for their area, their department, but not based on what's best for the entire institution, probably a good time to engage in some strategic planning. Also, again, focusing on the institutional goals, which is where we need to be. But if you see instead that your institutions, they're focusing on individual goals or group goals, then it's probably a good time to engage in strategic planning. So if athletics has their goals and academic affairs has their goals, and student life or student activity, student engagement, student success has their own goals, but none of these goals are in sync, that's a problem. Changes in the economy, changes in politics. So, we live in an ever changing political dynamic, and depending on any number of circumstances, the views about higher education can be positive or negative in the public sphere, and that can influence changes on what happens in higher education, and it can direct policy. So if there are things that the public doesn't like about higher education, they can introduce policy to change it if that's what they so choose. Um, if the economy changes and, just for example, in Texas, there's the public university fund, and it has funding for certain universities. And that usually has been based on um, oil and gas revenue from the previous 2 years. Now, if oil prices are high, that fund typically has more money in it, when it's time to divide up some of the money. If oil prices are low, then that fund has less money in it, and that means less money goes to those institutions. So, and that it can impact those students or those schools' budgets. It can impact how much money the state has in general in terms of the economy. If the state collects property and sales tax, and if people have lower incomes and they spend less in sales tax, uh, you have less money to go around when it's time to say, well, each institution gets a certain amount of money, for special projects. If there's less money to spend, institutions are going to get less money, or fewer institutions are going to get money. So lots of politics and economic changes that are just the reality. So lack of clarity around organizational success. So if if the people in enrollment management or external operations or student engagement don't know what success looks like, they're going to have a hard time achieving it, right? So employees want to know, what does it mean to win? What does it mean if I help the organization succeed? What do I have to do in order to do that? If I need to do certain things to be successful at my job and to meet or exceed expectations, what are the things that you need to do in order to do that? So clarity is helpful for employees to know, and for leaders of different departments, divisions, etc., to know how to help their teams achieve those goals, so they can, that those goals can help them help their employees. Sometimes you have new initiatives, opportunities, new programs. So maybe there's an opportunity to get into a new healthcare degree, or a new engineering degree, or maybe there's an employer who wants to work with your institution to train their students, or train their employees, or to hire your students when they graduate. Uh, there's a grant out there for student success, and it involves certain things, and so there's all kinds of opportunities that sometimes present themselves, and you have to sort of look at your strategic plan and say, does this align, or engage in some strategic planning around that. Is there a need to increase your innovation and creativity? Are things getting stale, or there's just you get to a point where there's no new ideas and you do things and nobody knows why you do it? It's just you get the standard response of, that's why we've always done it. We've always done it that way here. And if you're looking at growing and improving as an institution, that's usually not the right answer. And so sometimes there can be a need for some creativity, and a strategic plan process can give your university or college, community college, technical college, opportunity to dream and think about what could be. Okay. All right. So Trump and Rubin, and you'll see that Rubin name a lot. He's done a lot of research in this area. They looked at what are some of the components of strategic planning. So that would include things like the mission, vision, values. So one of my research projects that I did not too long ago dealt with mission, vision, and values of Texas community colleges, and so looking at the themes there. You also have key stakeholder perspectives. So who are the key stakeholders? Students, faculty, staff, alumni, others, employers, getting their ideas on where the institution needs to go. Environmental scan, which is a kind of a fancy term for SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. as well as benchmarking against other institutions that you aspire to be like. A lot of institutions have what we call peer institutions or aspirant institutions. So peers are people that you're like, or that people think that you're alike. Aspirant institutions are ones that you maybe if you got better in certain areas you would be like those. So that is a part of the process. Themes and goals. Again, I looked at some of the themes and goals as related to the mission, vision, and values. But we're really talking about what are the goals for the institution? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to see yourself in a few years? That's a little more specific than a vision. Vision is kind of like, well, we want to be the best university in the state of Texas. But how you're going to get there are your goals, right? So you're going to focus on certain themes, certain priorities. And then you have strategies, priorities, action plans that take you toward those goals, okay? And then, so each strategic plan, you usually see some strategies and some priorities underneath that, that get really specific. You'll also have plan creation and implementation, as well as, your outcomes and achievements. How do you measure success towards your strategic plan? How do you document that you're making progress? So you got to create the plan, implement the plan, and then you got to document your progress as you go through the plan and achieve certain outcomes and achievements. So if you go look at a strategic plan, you'll get an opportunity to see now that you have this framework, you can kind of look at other strategic plans and see these elements. So you usually will find all of these in any strategic planning process. So things you need to consider when you engage in strategic planning, you need to consider things like leadership. Who's your leader? How do they lead? And who are the other key leaders involved in the process? Usually there's a strategic planning team that kind of leads the process. You may have some strategy leaders who leads particular areas and work with people across the institution in order to achieve those particular strategies or goals. There's going to need to be some communication planning, stakeholder engagement. Ideally, a strategic plan shouldn't be something that people hear about at the last minute. They should know what's going on. There should be opportunities for them to provide some level of input, even if they don't get to make the decisions about what's in it. There should be some dedicated plans to engage various stakeholders and to communicate with them. There's got to be some assessment. You have to know how is the process of creating the plan going, and then once you create the plan, how is the implementation process going? So if you don't have those pieces in place, it can really make your plan less effective. And so as you're designing it, are you designing it with SMART goals? Are they specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, timely? If your goals are, let's do a better job at academic advising. What does that mean? How do you do a better job? Have you even figured out if you need to do a better job? Maybe you're doing a great job, right? So you've got to be specific in figuring out how you're going to assess things. Culture, what's the culture of the institution? Is it a institution where faculty, staff are used to being very involved in decision making? Or is it an institution where shared governance is a really big deal, or is it an institution where faculty, staff just kind of come to work and expect the leaders to make some decisions and get stuff done? You got to know your institution, right? Because if you don't, you may alienate the people that you lead. So it's important to understand the organizational culture. Follow through, right? So if you create a strategic plan, as awesome as it looks on paper when it's created, if it just sits on the web, and nobody ever knows how are we doing on the plan. We spent time saying this is what we're going to do, but there's never any follow through updates about how the strategic plan is going. Uh, Again, that plan is probably not going to be achieved. Uh, but if you have proper follow through, if you see, a lot of times in some cases you'll see institutions actually post not just the plan itself, but they'll have a whole site dedicated to it where they'll have the plan, but they'll also have progress trackers where you'll see how the institution is doing in achieving certain goals. All right. So what did we talk about today? Well, we talked about the definitions of strategic planning. We talked about why you should engage or your institution should engage in strategic planning. We talked about the components of strategic planning. And we talked about different considerations, things you need to consider when you're engaging in strategic planning process. So hopefully you enjoy this video. Hopefully it helps you understand strategic planning in the higher education context a little bit better. Uh, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll see you in the next video.